Coffee is not the enemy of cortisol, cardio is not either. But the time you do those two things, down to the minute, is deciding whether they are releasing cortisol from your body or locking it in for another 12 hours. Most cortisol advice you have ever read begins with a list of things to eliminate. Today, we are doing the opposite. Today, we decode exactly how the cortisol mechanism works, so you can keep what you love and only change what actually makes a difference. Think about the tide. The tide is not bad when it is high. It is designed to rise strongly and on time, and then recede. Cortisol operates on the exact same principle. It is designed to peak in the morning, pushing you out of bed, burning energy, and activating the immune system, and then steadily decline throughout the day and hit rock bottom in the evening so the body can enter a state of repair. The problem is not the high tide. The problem is that the tide never recedes. When cortisol maintains a high level from morning until night, with no clear sharp peak, just a baseline that stays elevated forever, the body gets stuck in a chronic state of conservation, storing fat, breaking down muscle, suppressing the immune system, and slowing down all recovery processes. 3 signals are interfering with that tidal rhythm in your body right now. 2 of them are coffee and cardio, but not in the way you might think. By minute 8, you will understand why the exact same cup of coffee and the exact same cardio session, shifted by just 90 minutes, can go from increasing cortisol to lowering it. That mechanism is not complicated, but almost no one tells you this. Let us decode this. Cortisol has a natural 24-hour curve. Everything you do is either following that rhythm or breaking it. There is no middle ground. In the first 30 to 45 minutes after waking up, cortisol naturally peaks. Scientists call this the cortisol awakening response. This is not a stress reaction. This is a biological startup mechanism. This peak accounts for up to 60% of the total cortisol your body produces in the entire day. After that, if everything is working correctly, cortisol steadily declines and hits its lowest point around 9 to 10 in the evening. When this rhythm is disrupted, when a second peak appears in the afternoon or evening, the body cannot enter the recovery window. Not because cortisol is too high overall, but because the tide is rising high exactly when it needs to be going down. Research from Trier University in Germany confirms that a disrupted cortisol rhythm is directly linked to visceral fat accumulation, independent of the total amount of cortisol in the day. This is the signal that almost everyone ignores. Chronically high cortisol does not mean your cortisol is abnormally high in the morning. It means it does not go low enough in the evening. And this is where coffee enters the story. Because what coffee does to the cortisol curve depends entirely on a single variable that almost no one accounts for. Coffee does not create cortisol. It amplifies existing cortisol. Drink it at the right time, and it resonates with the natural peak and dissipates quickly along with your circadian rhythm. Drink it at the wrong time, and it creates a second peak in the middle of the day when cortisol needs to be decreasing. Here is the mechanism. Caffeine does 2 things simultaneously. It inhibits adenosine, the sleep-inducing hormone, and it stimulates the adrenal glands to secrete more cortisol. When you drink coffee during the cortisol awakening response window, from 6 to 8:30 in the morning, cortisol is at its natural peak. Caffeine adds to that peak, but this entire peak dissipates along with the natural rhythm of the body. The tide rises and then recedes exactly as designed. Research from the National Institutes of Health confirms that drinking coffee before 8:30 in the morning does not significantly increase cortisol in people accustomed to caffeine. But when you drink coffee after 9:30 in the morning, when cortisol is beginning its journey downward, caffeine creates an artificial peak. Cortisol rises again by 18 to 25% compared to the baseline. The tide that is receding gets pushed back up, and that artificial peak extends high cortisol deep into the afternoon, breaking the entire recovery curve for that day. The problem is not that you drink coffee. The problem is that you drink coffee at 9:30 in the morning because you did not get to drink it early in the morning, and you just created a second cortisol peak exactly when the tide needs to recede. There is no need to give up coffee. You just need to shift it. But coffee is only one variable. Because there is a second thing that creates a cortisol peak many times larger than coffee, and paradoxically, most people do it at the exact worst time of the day. High-intensity cardio triggers the strongest cortisol surge of the day, much larger than coffee. In the early morning or at noon, this peak dissipates with the natural rhythm. In the evening, it pushes the tide high exactly when it needs to be at its lowest. When you run, cycle fast, or do high-intensity interval training at an intensity over 65% of your maximum heart rate, the body activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the axis that coordinates the physiological stress response, and cortisol increases by 50 to 100% during and after the workout. This is a completely normal reaction. Cortisol is doing exactly its job, mobilizing energy for the working muscles. The problem lies in the half-life. After finishing the workout, cortisol takes 60 to 90 minutes to return to baseline. Work out at 6 in the evening, and cortisol is still high until 7:30 in the evening. Work out at 7 in the evening, and cortisol is high until 8:30 or 9 in the evening. Research from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research notes that high-intensity cardio after 6 in the evening delays the time melatonin begins to secrete by an average of 45 minutes and keeps cortisol higher than baseline. At bedtime, this is not a reason to skip evening cardio if that is the only time you have. This is a reason to know. If you are doing heavy cardio at 7 in the evening and wondering why cortisol does not come down, you just found the answer. Coffee and cardio are not the enemies of cortisol. They are powerful tools that are being used outside of their designed windows. Shift the window. Keep the tools. Now you have the translation. Here is the protocol. There is nothing to eliminate. You just need to reset the tidal rhythm. Step 1. Reset the cortisol awakening response correctly. In the first 10 minutes after waking up, get exposed to natural light. Go out to the balcony, stand next to a window, or step outside. Morning natural light is the strongest signal to activate the cortisol awakening response peak at the right intensity and the right time. Do not look at your phone in the first 20 minutes, not because of the blue light, but because the content of emails, messages, and social networks triggers an immediate cognitive stress response, pushing cortisol up from anxiety before the natural cortisol awakening response peak has time to dissipate. Step 2. Optimize the coffee window. The simple rule: drink your first coffee 90 minutes after waking up, not earlier. Drink your last coffee at least 8 hours before bedtime. If you wake up at 6 in the morning, your first coffee is at 7:30, and your last coffee is before 2 in the afternoon. If you wake up at 7 in the morning, your first coffee is at 8:30, and your last coffee is before 3 in the afternoon. Within that window, the number of cups is not the problem. The problem is the position on the cortisol curve, not the total amount of caffeine. Step 3. Reset the cardio window. High-intensity cardio, like high-intensity interval training, sprinting, or high-intensity cycling, is best from 6 in the morning to 12 noon, and acceptable up to 3 in the afternoon. If you can only work out in the evening, switch to Zone 2 cardio, keeping the heart rate at 60 to 65% of the maximum rate. Fast walking, light swimming, or relaxed cycling, enough to maintain cardiovascular fitness without creating a significant cortisol peak. Evening resistance training is a better choice than high-intensity interval training if you only have a time frame from 6 to 8 in the evening, as the effect on cortisol is significantly lower than high-intensity cardio. Step 4. Close the cortisol window in the evening. Turn off stimulating content like news, social networks, and online debates before 9 in the evening, not because of the blue light, but because every time you read a piece of news that causes outrage or anxiety, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis activates a small cortisol surge, and 5 small surges combined are enough to keep the tide from going down. Keeping the room temperature at 64 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 18 to 20 degrees Celsius, in the 2 hours before sleep, supports the hypothermia process, synchronized with the receding rhythm of cortisol. And taking 200 to 400 milligrams of magnesium glycinate before sleeping is not a sedative, but a cofactor for the enzyme that metabolizes cortisol which the majority of adults are lacking without knowing it. You do not need to give up coffee. You do not need to give up cardio. You just need to know where the tide is and work to its rhythm. Now you have the translation. What time are you drinking coffee? And what time frame of the day do you do cardio? Leave a comment below. I read all of them. Comment the word decode if you are doing exactly what is advised, eating clean and training enough. But cortisol still refuses to go down and your body still does not change. And the next decoding answers directly the question that most men over 40 have not dared to ask their doctor. If cortisol is destroying your testosterone from the inside, what needs to be done to increase testosterone in a way that actually appears in blood test results, not just in subjective feelings? 7 mechanisms. Every mechanism has measurable data, and at least 2 of them are things you have never seen in any testosterone boosting list before. Do not miss it.